folks, it's Speedistevie video time again. Lewis Hamilton took a thrilling victory for the Mercedes-AMG Petronas F1 team at the 2021 Bahrain Grand Prix, with Valtteri Bottas finishing in a strong third position. Please watch this video right to the end, and subscribe, it would be greatly appreciated, and if you click the bell you'll get to know as soon as new videos are published, almost daily.
It was one of the most thrilling, nail-biting, chest sort of bursting experiences that I've ever had at a racetrack. We've had a question asking us whether we've made any changes to the way we plan our sessions, given that the free practice sessions are now shorter than they used to be last year. Well, the simple answer is yes, all the teams have had to make changes because going from an hour and a half to an hour for those sessions makes quite a big difference. Last year we had the luxury at the start of sessions to wait for a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes sometimes, to let other teams clean the track and get the track in a state where we could then start to work on our program. That luxury is gone with this change. You need to start when the session starts, and then you need to keep the runs coming, because that lack of half an hour means you really do need to keep your car out on the track as much as possible. And the time in between runs gets quite compressed. We reckon we had something like 6 or 7 minutes for doing the changes in between runs, which puts quite a large limitation on the sort of things you can contemplate doing in the session. There's not really any time for freestyling or changing direction in the session itself. You have to have a pre-programmed plan, you have to stick to it, and you have to execute it cleanly. It's quite high pressure, but it's also quite exciting, and I think probably a better product for the fans because the action on the track is always there. We had a rather unusual question come in. It just said, "Interesting facts?" ? It's not really sure quite what to say, so I'll just pluck a thing at random. I was reading this weekend about deep sea divers, saturation divers, who breathe a mixture of oxygen and helium so that they don't get poisoned by having to breathe too much oxygen and too much nitrogen at very high pressures. And I think most people know that this diving gas, this mix of gases, makes everyone sound like Donald Duck when they're speaking. That's fairly common knowledge. What I didn't know, but I read at the weekend, was that these deep sea diving companies use a sort of helium descrambler to allow them to be able to understand what they're saying. It actually lowers the timbre of the voice and turns it back to normal from the sort of Donald Duck sound back to a normal human voice. So helium descramblers, they're my interesting factoid of the day. The question we've been asked is why we bought 2 sets of hard tyres to the race instead of 1 medium and 1 hard tyre like our competitors Red Bull did. Well, the honest answer is this is a very finely balanced decision. There isn't like one of them is a no-brainer, the other one's a completely moronic choice. It's a matter of not taste, but each one has a slight advantage over the other in certain circumstances. So the medium tyre, all things being equal, will be slightly faster over a certain number of laps, but it will die sooner. It will eventually degrade and fall off a cliff sooner than the hard. The hard tyre just a whisker slower, but it will be fairly bulletproof for a large number of laps. So those 2 different characteristics give you different options. We judged, and you have to remember we were only at this track a few months ago in 2020, we judged that the pace difference between the hard and the medium was going to be sufficiently small that we valued the increased life a little higher than we valued that shade of extra pace that the medium tyre gave you. And we intended to use that extra life to put ourselves in a position where we could be brave at the point where we did our stops. We know in Bahrain that it is one of the tracks that has the most powerful undercuts. You need only to get within about 2 seconds of the car ahead, and if you stop 1 lap sooner, then you can jump past using an undercut. Now, if you know that what you've got tucked up in the garage is a nice set of unused hard tyres, and you know that that set of tyres can go deep into the race, then it gives you the confidence to make that undercut move, to dive in the pits and stop really quite early in the race, and to hopefully use that undercut to jump past. If you're sitting on a medium tyre with someone hard up behind you, and you're worried that they're going to undercut you, but all you know is that you've got mediums in the garage, then you're nervous about diving in the pits too early in the race, because you know that your tyres maybe are going to struggle if they have to run too long a stint. So we placed the value on the stint length, and it was that we then used in the race, admittedly in quite an extreme way, to make sure that we used the length of the stint to our advantage. And it was that allowed us to first undercut and then protect against an undercut, having seized the lead with that very, very aggressive early stop and long final stint that Lewis did to hold on for the win. So it's a matter of taste, a matter of choice, but we chose it for those reasons, and then we exploited that opportunity to sneak a win in a very, very closely fought race. Was a 3-stop race ever considered, or was 2-stop always our plan? I think probably this might have been sort of in the minds of some of the commentators as they were watching the race when we made our second stop, because there was still, I think, 28 laps to go at that point, and they thought, oh, this team looks like it's setting up for a 3-stop race. But the honest answer is absolutely no. 3-stop would have been instant death at that track, far, far too slow a strategy. We were just making the absolute maximum of what the hard tyre could offer us, and 3 stops was never something that we considered. One of Valtteri's pit stops didn't go so well. We lost a lot of time in it. What happened? When the car came into the pit stop box, Valtteri came in very neatly, positioned the car neatly and well, which is always a help for the pit crew. But sadly, one of the gunmen went onto the wheel, started to disengage the nut, loosen the nut, but then started to withdraw the wheel gun just a little bit too soon before the nut had spun off its thread. And because it was still offering some resistance at that point, as he withdrew the wheel gun, the socket on the wheel gun started to disengage from the nut and then started to spin round. We call it machining the nut because it starts to chip away at the edges of the nut and destroy the nut, a bit like when you're using a screwdriver and you don't have it lined up properly and you start to sort of damage the screwdriver slot. So as he pulled away, the gun machined away at the nut, and it didn't actually come off its mountings. He went back in to deal with it, but the gun recognizes, or it's designed to recognize when it's done a gunning off action, and it automatically shuttles the gun so that it's then in doing up mode. And so when he went back on to finish the job of taking the wheel nut off, the gun is now in doing up mode, and instead of undoing the nut, it's then doing it up again, and the subsequent sort of follow-on mess of that is what causes something which is normally a beautiful two-second pit stop, causes it to then collapse into something that hemorrhages lap time and seconds in the pit lane. But all of it was caused by that initial misplacing of the wheel gun, machining the nut as the wheel gun came off. If Valtteri's second pit stop had not gone wrong, were we positioning Valtteri as a sort of traffic jam to hold up Max in his pursuit of Lewis? The answer to that is no. The stop lap that we chose for Valtteri was the lap that gave Valtteri his best chance of getting past Max. Valtteri had a nice set of hard tyres in the garage, as did Max. But the Red Bulls had shown some nervousness about making long stints. They had stayed out on the track when Lewis had managed to undercut them earlier in the race. And so we knew that by stopping Valtteri when we chose, we would present Max with a dilemma. After a couple of laps of Valtteri being on those new tyres, if he'd had a good pit stop, he would have already been threatening Max for the undercut. Max would have had to come in to protect against Valtteri, and that would have allowed Valtteri to be right up against Max and able to fight with him for position. If Max had continued to show the sort of nervousness that Red Bull had exhibited about doing long stints, then it would have allowed Valtteri to get past him with an undercut if Max chose not to cover him. And that would have placed Valtteri ahead of Max on the road and with the same sort of chance that Lewis had of defending against Max later in the race. So the time when we chose to stop Valtteri would have given Valtteri his best chance of getting in front of Max. It didn't work out, of course, because the pit stop was too slow. And that is a very sad thing for Valtteri, who had shown extremely good pace up to that point in the race and then showed good pace afterwards, recovering from that slow pit stop and finally taking the fastest lap of the race as a consolation. So it's a shame it didn't get a chance to show how that strategy would have unfolded. We've received a question asking, did we feel in the garage as nervous as the questioner did in those closing laps of the race? Well, I don't know, of course, how nervous you, the questioner, felt during those last laps of the race, but I absolutely know how we felt. And it was one of the most thrilling, nail-biting, chest sort of bursting experiences that I've ever had at a racetrack. We have all sorts of tools at the track that make predictions for us, that show us how the tyres are wearing, what the likelihood is of holding a place, not holding a place. And we have the timing screens like everyone else, and we have the television like everyone else. But all those tools were of no help. They were making a prediction that was changing with about every 2 or 3 seconds. It was saying Lewis was going to win. Then it would change its mind and say that Max was going to win. But honestly, you didn't need the software to know how tight it was. And all of us were holding our breath, crossing our fingers, crossing our toes, and just hoping with everything we had that Lewis would be able to hang on to the end. That he did so in such style, that he did so with such inch-perfect positioning of his car at turn 4 when Max had that one go at him, that he did so with that degree of class just added to the thrill of it all. And when he finally crossed the line, there was an outbreak of mass hysteria in our garage with the utter delight of it. Last year we managed to win lots of races with a very strong set of performances, but there will be very few races as memorable as the one that we enjoyed yesterday in Bahrain. Pizza with pineapple on top, question mark. I'm really the wrong guy to ask this. There are many people on the race team who are very into their food, but I'm much more of a sort of eat to live type person than a live to eat sort of fellow. So I like all pizza. Pineapple, no pineapple, long as it's full of carbs and fat, I'll get it down my throat. Thank you very much for all your questions, and we'll be back in 3 weeks' time after the next race in Imola.
That's it for another Speedistevie video. Subscribe now.